we're going to have Jeremy Reisman on in a sec here because he can probably help us answer a lot of these questions. So
for sure.
Please welcome in the man, the myth, the legend, PrideOfDetroit.com, which all of you, I'm sure, staying in tune with for all your Lions news. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Jeremy Reisman. Jeremy!
What's up, fellas?
How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you guys?
I am good, Jeremy. I want to say thank you for joining the show. Number one, I know you got to, especially this time of the year, we're getting closer to training camp, so things are kind of picking up here. I want to ask you, because we just had a discussion. We've been talking about this all offseason with the Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery backfield. We all agree best running back duo in the NFL. But then there's the crowd of people that are very high in Jahmyr, and I get it. Very talented. What's your take on what the carry share looks like this year when you have such a talented back in Jahmyr, but you also have David who's so productive and you can rely on him to get a ton of carries? How do you think that balances out?
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, maybe it went from David Montgomery being 1A to Jahmyr Gibbs being 1B to just flipping those two. So now Gibbs might be the 1A, Montgomery might be the 1B, but there's still one to me. Like they're not going to like take Montgomery, shave off 20% of his rushes. I think he's still going to get a very high volume because he does what they want to do, which is be such a physically imposing team. And not that Jahmyr doesn't have that in his bag. In fact, that was something I was kind of surprised about in his rookie season, how physical he was when he was running. But David Montgomery will punish you. And I'm sure you all saw the clip of him benching or whatever he was doing. I'm not a gym rat, so I don't know exactly what he was doing, but like 800 pounds or whatever. That guy, I mean, Aiden Hutchinson described him as a bowling ball trying to tackle him. So he's very much still going to be a big part of its identity. I think the Lions are I think they're going to do a lot of, riding the hot hand type of thing. And what I'm most excited about, and this is me crossing my fingers for probably the 15th year in a row, hoping this is actually going to happen, more 2 running back sets, because they really seem to be talking up Jahmyr Gibbs as developing him as a receiver, as a route runner. And so if he's out there running routes, maybe lined up in the slot, maybe you get David Montgomery out there too. And you don't know who the ball is going to at that point. So I still think David Montgomery is an essential part to this offense, to their identity, and to their success too, right? I mean, the man had over 1,000 yards last year, and I don't think that was a fluke. I don't think that was, the Lions just giving him any favors. That was him earning those yards.
Absolutely.
You're speaking my language with both of them on the field at the same time. Keep the best players on the field, Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
Want to ask you this though. Kind of mini camps are over now, kind of in that lull period here heading into training camp. Wanted to get from you kind of your thoughts going into training camp on any like big storylines that some people should be looking out for, whether it's, you have a couple in mind of it's different battles or kind of your mindset going in and what you're going to be looking for in training camp here with the Lions.
Yeah, it's going to be different than typical years, right? Because I think at this time we're usually talking about, all right, who's going to win this starting spot? Who's going to win that starting spot? There's 1 or 2 starting spots on the whole roster up for grabs in training camp. To me, this is more about, players developing, and, if you're kind of the, the roster obsessee, maybe getting excited about tight end 3 and running back 3 and, offensive line 8, 9. If those are your thing, there's still plenty of things to talk about. Other than that, I think you're talking about young players taking a jump. So will Josh Paschal take a year 3 jump? Will Jack Campbell take a year 2 jump? Will Jamison Williams become the wide receiver 2 that this team needs him to be? Where does Brian Branch play? Like those are kind of the things that I think are a little bit more interesting than maybe, depth upon depth upon depth, who's going to win the special teams battle, who's going to do that. But I mean, that's sign of growth, right? That's sign of this team being better than we've ever seen it in the modern era, where we're talking about that the only battles in terms of position are these depth second, third, and fourth string guys. But again, I think some of these other major positions where Jamison Williams is going to start, Jack Campbell is going to play. It's important that those guys develop. Are we going to find out in practice, when they're going against themselves and not tackling, that they've taken that next jump? Probably not necessarily, but we saw some growth from JMO in OTAs. You're hoping he takes the next step. Same with Jack Campbell. I think we noticed some growth with him in the spring. But yeah, to me, it's more about just those young players continuing to grow, because that's to me how this team takes the next jump. It's okay, you guys were pretty darn good last year, but you need to take it to a next level. And you're probably not going to get a ton of play from your rookies, right? You're going to get Terrion Arnold, obviously, but everyone else is going to either be in a reserve role or a rotational role. So you're really depending on those young players to take that next jump. And that's, to me, what I'm going to be looking for.
I mean, you mentioned the pointless battles. That it's so true because we spent a whole day, Jeremy, on Jake Bates. I mean, the kicking battle. So like, I get it. And I'll ask you this because they gave him a 2-year deal, I believe it was. To battle out with Michael Badgley. They cut James Turner, who reportedly was kind of having he had a good stretch, and the media didn't get to see the other days. What do you think of the Jake Bates, Michael Badgley battle? Anything that concerns you with Bates? Because we bring up, obviously, we went to a Panthers game this year and it was like 9,000 people. It's going to have about 6 times that in the Lions Stadium. So I get that concern, but what are your thoughts on what he can do in this room? Because he does add a different dimension that Michael Badgley can't do, but Michael Badgley also pretty consistent, Jeremy. He's pretty consistent.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Consistency to me is going to be the guy that wins out, and you just have a longer spreadsheet with a guy like Michael Badgley. Jake Bates, awesome story. He could be a really phenomenal kicker in this league, but the sample size is so small right now. It's cool that he played at Ford Field and he made some big kicks, made a 64 game winning kick. Like, that's a high pressure kick. Even if it doesn't have, 65,000 people in the stadium, it's a high pressure kick. He was kicking in a playoff game. But he did, he kind of slid a little bit towards the end of the season. And he just, we're even talking going back to college and high school. There's no tape on him. There's no record of him. And so to me, I think he's playing from behind when he's entering training camp, and probably significantly behind, because the Lions value players they can trust. They value players that they can rely on. They value that consistency, and they've gotten that from Michael Badgley. He hasn't been perfect. He doesn't bring the long distance that the Jake Bates brings, but if you can get a guy that's relatively solid from 49 and shorter, that has value in this league, especially with a team that's going to continue to be as aggressive as the Lions are when they get to the other team's side of the field. I think there's this fantasy that people are playing in their mind that, they sign Jake Bates. He's going to win out the job. Suddenly every 4th and 3 from the 40-yard line, they're just going to kick field goals. Like, that's not in Dan Campbell's DNA. He's not doing that out of necessity. He's doing that because he thinks scoring touchdowns wins in this league. And he thinks 4th and 3 is a good opportunity for the offense to stay on the field because they're really good. And that doesn't change with a new kicker. So I get the appeal of Jake Bates. I'm not going to sit here and say like he's not going to win the job. I just think he has to absolutely wow and blow. I think Michael Badgley almost has to blow the opportunity for Jake Bates to really win that over, because again, like, trust is hard to find amongst kickers, and Badgley has enough experience to me that I think he has a built-in level of trust that's going to win him the job.
I'm going to be keeping an eye out on the kicking battle. I can't wait for training camp for that. You did mention something. You mentioned their kind of consistency with the Detroit Lions, and that's what Dan and them look for. One thing, and over here, I'm a little weird when it comes to it. I look into the depth here going into training camp in the season.
You love your wide receiver threes, but
my wide receiver depth. That
Sure.
You know where I'm going, Jeff, is the wide receiver depth here. One thing that I took out of minicamp and something that was interesting to me, Antoine Randall L made a comment that said, hey, there's a lot more work to be done in this wide receiver room. And my guess is doing our job is guessing it's the Antoine Green, DPJ, that kind of back end kind of crew there. What's your thought on this room? Like, do you see them at all bringing someone in if those don't work out? Because we spoke with John Macaroon as well. And I told him, like, I feel like Dan would have said something more positive about Donovan Peoples-Jones because he was speaking so highly of so many players, and there just wasn't that many conversations about DPJ, which I think a lot of people were expecting to hear out of minicamp. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I was kind of with you. Like, I thought that might have been Donovan Peoples-Jones' position to lose. They obviously they trade for him, so they saw value in him last year. They re-signed him this year, so they liked something that they saw while he was inside the building. And he made a couple big catches last year, and so I thought when we came out to OTAs, I kind of expected him to be out there with the starters. They tend to put their more veteran players out there anyways and make their young guys earn it. But it was Antoine Green most of the time during OTAs. Now, both of them were dealing with an injury here and there, so it changed depending on the day. But more often than not, it was Antoine Green with the starters. And so I'm kind of going into training camp thinking it's his job to lose. I think Antoine Green is kind of the leader out of the gate. Now that can change in an instant. Maybe sometimes you read a little bit too much into who's repping where. But to be clear, like neither of them, I think separated from each other in terms of their performance on the field. I think when Jared Goff is out there, he's looking for Amon-Ra first, Sam Laporta second, and everyone else third. Like that's just how he operates. Jameson Williams got a fair share of looks in the spring as well, but everyone else was, fourth, fifth, sixth down the line. And you have to remember that's how it's going to operate in the regular season too, right? Like this wide receiver 3 role that I think a lot of people are obsessing about, including myself, like it's going to be a relatively small role considering how many other weapons that they have, but it's important because they are going to be out there for 70-80% of the snaps. So sometimes it's not even what you're doing to get the ball in your hands, but blocking downfield, making sure you're running your route crisp so that everyone else is in the right place and you're setting up the defense. So it's an important role, but it might not have the kind of production that some people are expecting. But to go back to your original question, whether I think they're going to bring someone in, if they do, I think it's going to be towards the end of camp. I think they want to see who they have. I think they want to give Antoine Green an opportunity to win that job. I think they want to give Donovan Peoples-Jones the opportunity to win that job. I think Khalif Raymond is still a very good reserve on this team that is capable of maybe taking, a bigger chunk of the offense than he has in previous years. So I think they're going to first really get a better understanding of who they have in the room before they start searching for players that are out there or will be out there once the time roster cuts happen.
Yeah, and we speaking of just the roster in general, Amik came out on Twitter and he was talking about people calling him a depth piece. And I like Amik. We all like Amik. I watching some of his tape from last year, I thought he played extremely well for the Raiders. And he's someone that I think you can utilize in a couple different areas. I mean, he played a little outside. He could play in the slot, play at nickel. But then you have Brian Branch, who they kind of want to play more at safety. Yeah. This secondary is now kind of, it's become a strength. I mean, we haven't played, there's been no games played, but at least on paper, they've added a lot more depth. How do you see this secondary shaping up? Because we assume Carlton's cornerback number 1. You have Terron Arnold, who will probably start on the other side of him. And then Amik Robertson and Brian Branch, that nickel spot, you have him at – how do you see this secondary kind of playing out? I know you got to wait till training camp, but just kind of your early thoughts on Amik Robertson in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, if you go by how things were playing out in the spring, it certainly seems like they view Amik as a nickel, or at least having potential at nickel. And I thought he played a little bit better on the outside when he was with the Raiders, but I can see why, a guy of his size and his tenacity, why they would want him at the nickel. And so, Brian Branch wasn't practicing in the spring, so it's hard to say whether Amik Robertson is going to be the number 1 nickel, or if Brian Branch is going to be the number 1 nickel, or if Brian Branch is going to be mostly safety. But the way they talk about Brian Branch, like the one thing to me that is clear with Brian Branch is he is not coming off the field in 2024. He played like 40% of the snaps in the NFC Championship game, which is just, I think the Lions probably looked at that after the game and be like, what are we doing? That is unacceptable. He might be the best defensive player on our team, and he was barely in there against a 49ers team that ran the ball a lot. So that, they had a lot of 3 linebacker sets and therefore they didn't have a nickel corner out there. They want to make sure that doesn't happen. If they have to go against teams that are loading the box, they're going to move Brian Branch to safety, probably bring him close to the line because he's a good run defender as well. So my guess is that might mean a lot of safety. It's obviously going to depend on the opponent they play. If you are going to play a loaded box team that loves to run the ball, he's probably going to play more safety. If they're playing a spread team, maybe he plays a little bit more nickel. But what that tells me is that I think Amik Robertson is going to play nickel when Brian Branch slides back to safety. Now, you could do the same with Iffy too. Like Iffy can do a lot of the things that Brian Branch can do. It makes them interchangeable. It makes them, if they want to go 3 safeties, they can put all 3 of those guys out there. But, Dan Campbell said it a month or 2 ago, like we don't know what this secondary is going to look like because we have so many good options. It's a good problem to have. And I'm kind of with him. Like if I had to guess, I would say Branch might end up playing more safety than nickel this year because they like Amik Robertson at that spot. But at the same time, you're going to want Iffy out there too. And so it's a really interesting conundrum, but I think it's a good problem to have. And I think the thing that is important to keep in mind is just they're so protected for injury right now that, if you lose 1 or 2 of these guys, it isn't like you're pulling from someone else's practice squad and right. Adding someone like Kindle Vildor in the middle of the season. No offense to the man, but like that's a tough assignment to come in the middle of the season and suddenly be your team's starter for the playoffs. That's a tough look. And so the Lions aren't going to get stuck in a position like this. And that's a good thing.
Jeremy, I want to, and I know that this is kind of a question early on in the off season here, heading into training camp, and we'll probably have you on at some point to ask this question again. But I just want to get kind of your initial thoughts on your season expectations, predictions when it comes to the Lions. Obviously, everyone's kind of Super Bowl or bust, Super Bowl or bust. But obviously, there are still, like, on the defensive side, you got to see how the secondary does. A lot of people are questioning the other edge position outside of Hutch. Where are you at in, like, standing right now before training camp, before we get to really see the team and what they are? Where do you kind of stand on the expectations and predictions here?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the team on paper, I think it's the best Lions team I've seen in my adult lifetime. I really truly believe that. I think, the only reason the offense would potentially take a step back is the wide receiver spot. But as we were kind of talking about, J-Mo was making pretty big strides towards the end of the season. I thought he looked good in the spring. And that wide receiver role, as much as we worry about it, that they've got some bodies there and doesn't require a ton of production necessarily on the field. So I think offensively, with Ben Johnson back there, I have the utmost confidence that they're going to be fine, assuming, knock on wood, Jared Goff is healthy all season. Defensively, it's hard to imagine it's hard to imagine them not taking a significant jump because they've made so many investments on that side. The secondary might take some time to grow together because there's so many new faces in that room, but it's undoubtedly more talented. And man, I can't tell you how excited I am for the addition of DJ Reader. Like, I understand why people are upset that maybe they didn't add another edge rusher, or, maybe they aren't confident in Marcus Davenport, who continues to get overlooked by a lot of people, I think, as well. But man, DJ Reader to me has been one of my favorite players, one of the most underrated players, I think, in the NFL. The ESPN did their little, NFL exec poll, and DJ Reader was nowhere to be found on their list of 22 of the best defensive tackles, which I think is ludicrous.
Crazy.
Yeah, an elite run defender, a guy that brings a surprising amount of pass rush too. He's going to do wonders for Lee McNeil. He's going to do wonders for Aiden Hutchinson, right? Like, how many times did we see Aiden Hutchinson go around the corner only for the quarterback to step up in the pocket? You're not going to be able to do that with a Lee McNeil and DJ Reader in the middle. So I think the defense is going to take a pretty significant jump. And, I look up and down this roster and you can nitpick, but I don't see a roster that's any worse than fourth in the league. And so expectation should be sky high for this team. Now, injuries can happen. It's single elimination playoffs. There's no guarantee the Lions get as far as they did last year. It's why Dan Campbell said what he did after the NFC Championship game. But they have all of the pieces in place to, challenge for a Super Bowl. There's no reason you should expect anything less of this team. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. To me, I don't like calling anything less than a Super Bowl as a failure because there's just too many random things that can happen in an individual game, let an entire season. But this team is talented enough to win a Super Bowl right now, and that's where expectation should be.
I love to hear that.
Yeah, and one final question before we get you out of here, Jeremy. I want to ask you, with the contracts coming up, we got Lee McNeil, Iffy, and who they got one more coming up.
Carlton Davis. He's on.
What are your thoughts? And it's early, and you got to see these things play out. But just in Taylor Decker too. Decker being another guy that's up for a contract extension. And we talk about it a lot. I think they talk about the window. Obviously, it's going to be hard to re-sign everybody, but guys like Taylor Decker might be able to take a little bit of a discount. What are your thoughts on some of those guys coming up for a contract? And Lee McNeil, I mean, he goes out and gets double-digit sacks, Jeremy. We're talking about a $20+ million defensive tackle here.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw Matabuke get paid.
Right. Yeah, no, this is where Brad Holmes' job gets hard. You aren't going to be able to keep the band together as much as you'd want them to. So I'd imagine at least one or maybe two of the guys you just listed off are probably not going to be around in a year or two. And I think Lee McNeil's at the top of their priority list. They're talking him up quite a bit. He's out there for the jersey release. Like, I think they just view him as a very, very talented guy. I think it's interesting that he also wasn't on that list of the top 22 defensive tackles. And maybe that tells you that nationally speaking, maybe some of these other teams don't value him as much as the Lions do. And maybe that means that he isn't going to get $20 million. I don't think he's going to push $20 million a year, but you just never know, because that is a position where the value certainly seems to be going up, and understandably so. I think Chris Jones is a good enough example of how you can be disruptive enough to win a freaking Super Bowl from your defensive tackle. I think he should have been the MVP of that game, to be quite honest. Now, Not saying Lee McNeil's at that level, but he,
Mhm.
you know, I think he could put up a very good statistical season this year that like you said, raise that price up if he hits double-digit sacks. Now, I don't think he'll hit double-digit sacks, but you never know. I think he was at 6. What was he at 6 last year or something like that?
Missed a couple games,
and he's going to have DJ Reader next to him. You never know. As for the other guys, Taylor Decker to me is another really, really tough one because obviously they love the guy. He's such a perfect like model of this franchise in terms of the grit, in terms of the perseverance, in terms of just steady, reliable play. That, you know, that word again, reliable, just a guy that they can trust. But you're paying a lot of guys a lot of money on that offensive line. You have to make sure you spread the money across the board here with every position. So he's a really tough one. Iffy, I think, is highly dependent on this season, but at the same time, you know, I don't think he's proven enough to get a high value deal. Who are we missing here? I'm trying to remember. Who
Carlton, I think.
Carlton Davis.
Yep.
That's a really interesting one too, because you know, the way that they adjusted his contract made it really look like they were just waiting to slot in a couple new salaries down the line. And I still think people are sleeping on that addition a little bit because, you know, the Lions go draft Terry Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw, and they're like, oh, well, those are your two cornerbacks of the future. Well, Rakestraw might be playing a little nickel, and I think Carlton Davis has true cornerback one potential, especially in this defense. I think he's such a perfect fit for what Aaron Glenn wants that I think, you know, if I had to pick two out of those, I might pick Carlton Davis and Lee McNeil as the two most likely to get contract extensions this year. But obviously with a guy like Carlton Davis, he has to go out there and prove it first.
Yeah, no question. We appreciate you, Jeremy. You can check out more Jeremy stuff on X at Detroit Online and prideofdetroit.com and check out their work for all your Lions updates. Jeremy, we appreciate you. We'll talk to you.
Appreciate you a ton.
And potentially in the future before the season, but we appreciate you for taking the time today.
We'll probably see you at training camp too.
Sounds good, fellas.
Try and get out there. All right, there you go. Jeremy Reisman taking time out of his night to join the fellas. There you go.